Welcome. What kind of man are you?
We're living in a moment where the ground is shifting under our feet. Politics, identity, even basic humanity. It all feels up for grabs. As men, we're asking, what's our role in all this?
Time to tear up the old playbook. Do we step back or do we finally reckon with what it means to be a man who actually gives a damn?
This is What Kind of Man Are You? The podcast where we untangle masculinity, privilege, and the messy work of showing up. I'm Degan Davis, a therapist, writer, and author of the poetry collection, What Kind of Man Are You?
And I'm writer and producer Chris Gartlett. Each episode, we'll tackle the big questions. How do we be better allies? How do we confront fear in the world and in ourselves? And what's our responsibility when the stakes are this high?
No easy answers, just real talk about shame, courage, and the small acts that aren't so small, like standing up when it counts.
So whether you're here to rethink masculinity, fight for justice, or just feel a little less alone in the chaos, let's get into it.
This whole second series, we've been talking about movies, and we're going to talk about Long Time Running, the documentary about the Tragically Hip. And I think for this one, we always come at these conversations around men, around masculinity. I think we're going to start talking about the movie, but also talking about our memories of the Hip and just kind of what that band has meant to us and weave that into the documentary. Chris, do you remember the first time, and for those of you who don't know, I don't know if there could be anyone, if maybe you're outside of Canada, the Tragically Hip are probably one of the more seminal rock bands in Canada. I remember actually being in Cambodia in 1999, going into a bar in Phnom Penh, and the Hip, Trouble at the Hen House, it was playing.
That's my favorite album.
Yeah, it's a great album, isn't it? And the bartender had all the Hip CDs at that time. They're an incredibly Canadian band. They tell Canadian stories, and they've stayed here. That's where they've got they had their incredible fan base. Of course, a couple of years ago, their lead singer and sort of principal songwriter, although they took credit for all the songs, Gord Downie, died of brain cancer. And the long-time running movie is about the final tour. And so, yeah, we're going to talk about the Hip. Chris, do you remember the first time you heard the Hip?
Well, I can't, where I was, and I can't remember that. I definitely remember the first song I heard, which was Blow It High Dough.
Yeah.
Which is still a favorite. I mean, I don't know. We're probably in the high double digits in terms of how many songs I love by the Tragically Hip. I don't even know if that song is in my top 10, but even then, I don't think that's their first album, but it's,
I think it's
it was
their
their
second,
first hit, I would say.
Yeah.
And there are two things about that. It's innovative rock and roll, just the way it sounds, but it's also sort of a driving rock, that particular song. But also the poetry of the lyrics, very, very unexpected, but also true. And, it's the first line is they shot a movie once in my hometown. And what a scene setting first line, right? So I don't actually react this way to most music I hear. It usually takes me a while to sort of warm up, but Tragically Hip, instant liking.
It's interesting. In terms of first memory. Yeah, I mean, I think it was also a Blow It High Dough with that bass riff at the opening,
Yeah.
Yeah, and or that or New Orleans is Sinking. But that album, I think the first song I really took in because, I want to say something about the lyrics. Like, I think they were always a band that had lyrics that could be a little abstract. Like you wouldn't always know exactly what they're talking about. But yet they had certain songs which were very clear story-like songs, like 38 Years Old, the kind of tragic story of the family and it's sung from the perspective of the brother. And he's telling the story of their sister getting raped and their brother killing the man who did it and being in prison and staying in prison and not having Never Kissed a Girl, right? He's 38
Right.
years old, Never Kissed a Girl. I love the sound of the others. But that was the first song when I took in the story. I had that feeling of like I grew up in a small town. I had the feeling of that where the eyes watch you, like your history, in Toronto, in a big city, you can disappear into anonymity and you cannot in a small town. And I think that's part of what made the Hip, like they got that small town feel. But then you think about some of the lyrics in some of the other songs, you know, it's like I was talking to a friend today on the phone and we were saying like he's definitely weird, right? Gord Downie was
Oh
definitely
yeah.
weird. Like, and yet it wasn't weird for its own sake, and it wasn't weird in a way of like not grounded. He had his own artistry, of course. He had his own sense of the music. And he would say things, I'm like, I don't quite know what you mean, but I like it. And I think that touched a lot of people. And as he went on, the songs sometimes I think they became even more on that little abstract side where you could take lines out of it and be like, this is incredible. One of my favorite is No Dress Rehearsal, This Is Our Life.
Right.
I had an old partner of mine. We used to just look at each other and say, no dress rehearsal. It's like, and we would just say it about what you're going to risk, what you're going to, so there are these moments that are absolutely clear. And I think then there are these sort of painted impressionist words that you can sort of make a lot out of.
Absolutely. And even maybe we should talk a bit about the movie itself, because we could
Of
easily
course. Yeah. We
ramble
get
on about
lost
the
about
band
the Hip.
itself. But this is as you said, this is their last tour. Gord Downie already has brain cancer. And so it's partly a candid look at, backstage, getting ready, um, going on stage, also rehearsal and everything. But in the context of the fact that he had been diagnosed with this brain cancer before the concert tour, so he had to have a very serious operation,
Yeah. Yeah.
which led to him not remembering his songs.
Yeah.
And so he had to kind of access his memory.
Yeah.
Um, he had to remember the lyrics, he had to remember the
Yeah.
tunes, and they know that he's got this terminal brain cancer, but they decide to do a cross Canada tour, and they don't even know if Gord Downie's going to make it through this.
Yeah.
And of course, he does. It's quite famous, and the final concert was broadcast nationally, which you and I can both talk about, I'm sure. And each band member, and also some of their management, and even the costume designer, is interviewed. And I think his costumes for the tour were pretty important. And hearing Gord Downie himself, because he's interviewed quite extensively, that first rehearsal where it's like, oh my God, is this even possible? And
Yeah.
then slowly hearing about how he picked it up, and the clips of the concerts, he was on his game, right? Like
Yeah.
he wasn't, you and I have both seen the Tragically Hip at a different time, and he was always wild on stage. He was a little less physically wild, but still kind of had that kind of mischievousness and
Yeah.
humor, but also really deep emotion all at once. And that's one of the things that's great about this band. Like if they say it in the movie, they're this, you know, bar band essentially, but they're also poets. No.
Yeah, and I think the way it's set up, I mean, that whole series of concerts, and one of the, I forget who it, but someone says in the movie, like, it's rare that it's rare that you get to say goodbye to your fans. I mean, sometimes we have a classic, oh, this will be our last tour. But if the band members are well, they can do
Never
another
is.
last tour, right? Didn't the Eagles do like 10 or something? Or,
What about the Who?
the
I
Who,
remember their
right?
final concert in 1984.
And this really was the final concert. Like, you're set up at the beginning of the film, hearing the interview with his surgeon, who then talks about, like we
Right.
are, our very first time he listened to, and I think it was the same album, right? And Blow It High Dough being the first song. And just like that moment of this, probably he was like a kid then, going before he's gone to medical school, and then going in and actually operating. So you have this whole sense of you're watching this tour, you're watching this goodbye. I mean, of course, I had my eye on the band and watching Gord Downie, but just on the audience, there were so many shots of the audience, and in that way, it was like a goodbye. It was like a celebration of life, a
Yeah.
celebration of Canada. Like it was remarkable. I think it really, really, really succeeded. And I mean, I had to turn it off a couple of times, and I was with watching it again with my friend this morning, and I had it on, and he literally got up and is like, I can't listen right now,
Yeah.
and so it's a grief. It's a like, shared grief, which is really rare to have as a country, and to get to do it together like that.
Absolutely. And I think everybody, everybody in the audience knew all of the words to all of the songs. And it was it was the closest thing we had to a national religion that year. These are the hymns of our country in a sense.
The garage hymns, the
Yeah.
barbecue, the backyard barbecue hymns while you're drinking,
Cottage rock,
whatever.
and they really did dig deep into Canadian nostalgia. You've got 50 Mission Cap about Bill Barilko and
Morocco.
the wild coincidence of his last goal. His last goal he ever scores wins the Leafs the cup. That's a line from the song. And then he disappears on a fishing trip, and they
You'll
don't
never
win
win
another.
another.
Yeah. Oh, what was it? 1962, the year he was discovered. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
you know,
yeah, yeah.
this
It's
is
classic.
this is Canadian mythology being
You know,
built, right?
you know what I liked as much as that? Like I love that, but I love that he talks about putting the hockey card between the spokes,
Right.
right? And to
No,
make
no.
this wait,
He
no,
puts it
no,
in his
in
Oh,
his
sorry, is this a
cap.
different song?
No, you know what? Always mix this up. No,
Oh,
tell me, you tell the story.
well, the song is called 50 Mission Cap, right? So
Right.
he says, I stole this from a hockey card. So, which again,
Yeah.
I mean, we're writers. That is great writing because it's just like we
Yeah.
we as Canadians know exactly that experience.
Yeah.
Um, that he keeps tucked up under his 50 mission cap. So, and of course, a 50 mission cap, I'd have to look that up. I don't even know what that is, but I assume it's some sort of military thing where you get a cap after going out on 50 missions. I don't know.
And that's so funny. In my head, you're totally right, Chris. And you know what? In my head, but I think you're right. It's just the mentioning of I stole this from a hockey card. And I was thinking about what we did with hockey cards, which was put them like kind of shove them in so they would get between the spokes and make it sound like you were driving a motorbike with your bike. I was mixing that
Yeah,
up. But I think just the mention of a hockey card and small town is simply so Canadian in itself. And you're right, 50 Mission
right.
Cap. We'll have to find out. I thought that might have been just like the hat he wore that he's gone on so many adventures on and so many missions, but it probably has war reference.
Yeah.
Can I ask you then to
Mhm.
tell me another favorite song, or, a couple of songs? Why don't we go back and forth and share ones that really mean something to us? And we can, if they make an appearance in the movie, great. But
Well, certainly. So I'll say that my favorite album, as I mentioned, is Trouble at the Hen House. And I would say that my favorite songs are, it's so hard to choose, but because that's my favorite album, because I just sort of feel like every single song is a no skip, right? So it starts with a song called Gift Shop, and it starts with this kind of moody guitar sound, the beautiful lull, the dangerous tug, and you just sort of literally feel tugged into the song. And so it's both poetically beautiful, but then, it becomes a bit of a rock song. It's, I would say, Gift Shop on that album,
by the
and
Century is on that album.
Head by a Century is on that album, which really feels So these are a little bit less Canadian. They have a Canadian feel because they are the Tragically Hip, but I feel like it's a more introspective kind of, but also very imagistic. One of my favorite songs on that album is called Don't Wake Daddy. Can I just read you the opening
Please, please.
chorus? Sled dogs after dinner close their eyes on the howling wastes. Kurt Cobain reincarnated sighs and licks his face. Then they drift past strips of Serengeti and the gates of Sleepy Hollow too. You can pause and wonder. They paused in wonder. And yeah, I paused in wonder too. And
Incredible.
it's just so imagistic, Kurt Cobain as a reincarnated sled dog,
Licking
licking
his
his
face.
face. If it weren't for these lyrics, they'd just be another Canadian bar band.
Oh, the 100th Meridian.
Yeah.
Will,
What is a
and
great first line?
what is the first line of that?
Me debunk an American myth and take my life in
My
my
life in my
hands.
hands. Right. Beautiful. And that whole kind of monologue about get Ry Cooter to sing my eulogy, and
Yeah,
just the way
right.
it builds and builds is incredible. The atmosphere of it. And, I think what I wanted to say, I will talk a little bit more about my favorite songs, but I think what I want to say too is it's that contrast too of like, the Kurt Cobain reincarnated with this incredible sort of, these incredible rock hooks underneath and really compelling, just like they are still a rock band,
Yeah,
and to have them balance, to be able to go into the territory of dreams, reincarnation, a lot of vulnerable territory stories with such a driving rock hook or just like a really compelling riff is, I don't know, it's just so refreshing
yeah,
to feel that much. And I think you do that with great rock bands like Pearl Jam, has that, and Nirvana had that. But in terms of, I think one of my favorite songs of all time, and it's a tragic one, is Nautical Disaster.
yeah,
And what I love about that is the form of the song, because it's written as a letter. It's the man who was on
right.
this lifeboat that could not take others that were in the water that they had to leave behind, and he's haunted by this and he's singing it, and the music has that brooding rock power to it, and it builds and builds, and it's also just heartbreaking. But the lines where he says things like, he talks to who he's writing to, anyway, Susan, he
Right.
speaks to her in the song. It's feverish, right? He's been haunted by this, and he's sharing this with this woman, Susan, right? He says, anyway, Susan, if you like, our conversation is as faint as a sound in my memory as those fingernails scratching on my hull. And then the guitar comes in and with the grief and still kind of powers through it. It's just an incredibly inventive song. And that he climbs so deeply inside this story. I think that's the one that tugs at my heart the most.
Yeah. It's amazing because every time I try to think of my favorite, I'll be like, well, there's like, oh, what's that one? It gets so sticky down here.
Little Bones,
Little Bones, New Orleans is sinking, and even Twist My Arm.
Locked in the
It's
trunk of a car.
right.
Um,
So
yeah,
I want to talk about that album for a second because I
yeah,
really think that somehow that was the one that cemented them as kind
I
of
agree.
their Canadian. I don't know that it's their best one. It's hard to pick a best one, but when Locked in the Trunk of a Car came out, people were just like, what the hell are we hearing? Because those were some imagistic and wild storytelling lyrics.
Yes.
And going from, I don't know how old I am, I've got what in my belly? What is it?
It's based on the Quebec crisis, right? In 70, and the murder
It
of
is?
Pierre Laporte, yeah, by the FLQ.
Oh,
They don't know how old I am. They found armor in my belly, from the 16th century conquistador, I think. They don't know how old I am. They found armor in my belly. Passion out of machine revving tension.
so this is like he's doing some historical allusions, but then,
Yeah.
morning broke out the backside of a truck stop, end of the line, a real rainbow likening luck stop, where you could say I became chronologically fucked up, put $10 in just to get the tank topped off. Suddenly we're right on the ground, right? I remember when that song came out, and it was kind of the talk of the town
Yeah.
as a song. And then that 50 Mission Cap is on that one. Wheat Kings. Well, I want to get to Wheat Kings.
Could we just stay with this one for a minute? This because I remember seeing them. It was kind of a Lollapalooza, type concert in Barrie, I think, where I
Oh yeah,
saw them. You remember one of those around like 80, maybe 90,
probably
90 or
early
91.
90s.
Yeah. And when they did Locked in the Trunk of a Car, the end, he screams, "Let me out." I mean, he did
Yeah.
an extended monologue that actually reminded me of something like the Grateful Dead didn't do that with lyrics, but they did it musically, right? They would
Mm.
go off and they would take a song and see where it went. And he did that lyrically there. And he was, kind of ranting almost as if, he was in the trunk of this car or whatever, however you want to see the meaning from the historical piece of this, kidnapped labor minister, or or just like, some metaphoric place of being stuck. I mean, because I think you can see both. But when he was screaming this,
Yeah.
let me out," and this long extended, monologue. I mean, the frenzy that went through the crowd, it was incredible. I think that's one of those examples again of, this is obviously based on reports of this 1970 FLQ crisis, but you feel it outside of that. You kind of feel the passion of something. And he even says in it, like, it's better for us if you don't understand. I really think that's true. You cannot always put your finger on these lyrics and say this, but yet I trust them and I trust the emotion in them. And that's kind of
Yeah.
cool, right? There's not a lot of bands where I can say, it's sort of like when you look at some kind of Picasso and say, like, okay, like, see this cubist piece here or whatever it is, and I don't quite get it, but I get that it's a sort of sense of consciousness or a way of perceiving the world. And I think there's a little bit of that in there in the midst of the rock songs. And I keep going back to it, but I love that about this band.
And I think that's such an important line, because it's not just better when he says it'll be better for us if you don't understand. I kind of think like it would be better for the song if you just brought your own meaning to it. And although I
Nice.
remember once, and I think he was being a little, again, mischievous here. He said that the song was actually a metaphor for being stuck in a bad relationship. And the thing is,
There you
I
go.
d-
We can make it what we want, right? It can be
yeah,
stuck in a bad
exactly.
job. It can be
But
stuck in this fascistic, North
hellscape.
American landscape. Yeah, yeah.
And so I think this album came out 91, 92. Like, I think for Canada, this was the beginning of the 90s, really. And
92, yeah. Yeah.
and so I love this song. It may not be 100% my favorite song on the album, but this whole album, again, a no skip album. It's very, very hard to pick favorites. We've talked about 50 Mission Cap that was on this album, but just to talk about their staying power, Wheat Kings is probably today one of their most popular songs.
Yeah.
And we know this song to be about the falsely accused David Milgaard, who was put in jail for a very long time and was released after I don't even know how long. I think it was over 20 years, wasn't it?
A long
And
time, yeah.
and again, beautiful first line, sundown on the Paris and the prairie. But what's interesting to me is at the time when that album came out, that song was a deep cut, right? Like, people weren't talking about that song. It was just another one of the songs on the album. I mean, some people who are like really into it would be like, no, no, this is the best song on the album. But it didn't have, like, right now, I think of that song as kind of their signature song almost.
Yeah.
But I think that's been since that time, which says a lot
Yeah.
about the power of their music and the depth to which they go.
So we've strayed from the movie, and maybe before we take a break and then, talk a little bit about what we can extrapolate from the movie and them thinking about men, masculinity, and our usual,
Yeah,
piece.
what this is about.
Yes. And I mean, the hip have sort of like they've hypnotized us. I'm just like, the music is so powerful. The lyrics are so powerful. I just kind of let myself be drawn, into
Yeah,
this conversation. But I think I just want to say for the movie again, I love that it's on Gem and you can watch it for free. That's amazing. And I love too that the final show was broadcast, the final concert. And I remember my daughter at the time, I think she was about 8 or 9. And I remember saying she was ready to go to sleep. And I said, let's stay up and watch. And we watched an hour of it. And I told stories about what the songs meant. And we talked about Gord Downie, this being likely his final performance and everything. And I saw watching the movie, there were some younger folk in the crowd that were singing
sure.
along. I don't know. I just love that. So yeah,
Well,
that's my take. Good. Go and see it. It's good. And you will likely not be dry-eyed at the end.
well, do you want to take a quick break and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about the masculinity of the Tragically Hip?
Absolutely.
We're back. You may have noticed that both Degan and I are big fans of the Tragically Hip, and we are not a music podcast. We are actually a masculinity podcast, and perhaps it's time we talked about why we chose this particular movie to review. And some of the masculinity themes we thought were like really coming out of that. What do you think, Degan?
Yeah.
What were your thoughts around this?
I think hearing him interviewed in the movie, and there's a moment where he's facing his death, right? He knows that. And he's a bit shaken, but he's coming back for this tour. And he's got that mischievousness in his eye. And I think he balances this kind of real honesty with also this kind of rock star persona, right? He allows himself to be vulnerable in a way, yet it's not gushy either, right? It's like these little moments. And there was one where he's talking about his favorite music, and he's talking about this is after the operation, and he's in the car, he's going for chemotherapy treatment, and he's talking about in the car listening to music, who I think his brother who's driving him, and playing all this music. And one of the bands he mentions is the Bee Gees, and you're not supposed to love the Bee Gees, but I just love him. And so he's always ready just to say, yeah, all of the things. And I think what came out so strongly in the movie was the incredible affection, incredible love. And this band were his family
Yeah.
in many ways. So you're seeing at the end him do his thing, wear his incredible clothes, the hat, and this very shiny silver or blue sparkling pants that
Yeah, it was
and
different for every show.
different for every show, and he's into it, and he's also making fun. He's like, "What do you think of this hat?" He's a performer. He loves it, and you also see him. He's hugging the stage manager woman he's probably known for so long, and his bandmates before the show's going on, and he's kissing him on the cheek, and he's brushing against their lips, and he's just full of love. And I think I've almost never seen that in rock bands or almost anywhere. And
Yeah.
I just loved seeing it. It just felt he's not afraid to just say, I love you and show it. And I love that.
Well, he's describing it in voiceover, and they show before one of the shows. He, it's almost like they're lined up to give him a hug and a kiss, right?
Yeah.
And he says, I don't care. I just said into each one of their ears, I love you so goddamn much. And I was saying to you before we started recording, I just feel like they're men. You can't deny they're masculine, but they offer a way of being a man that doesn't force you into any kind of box or stereotype. They just are their authentic selves. And I felt that about every single member of that band. It wasn't just Gord Downie. He's the flashy one, and he's the one who got the most attention, obviously, partly as lead singer and partly because of what was going on. But like each of them, they started out as long hair rock band guys and they continued. They made a whole career out of it. They never went to higher education. They're from Kingston, so they're not small town boys. They're from Eastern Ontario. They're not like elitists or anything. But at the same time, they're totally themselves. And it's so inspiring to me. I even feel that in their music, seeing the movie and just seeing how they could relate to each other without any kind of masculine guard and older, so they weren't having groupies or anything. But still, they just felt like real dudes, real good dudes.
Yeah, and one thing that struck me too is was in the movie, the band members, I think it's the lead guitar player is saying, "We had each other," and Gord had the audience. And at one point, Gord Downie says something like, "I wanted to look into the face of every single person here."
Right.
And, I
Yeah.
was reminded, and this is very different, obviously, artistically, but I was reminded with the final shows of Leonard Cohen. He did some tours when his manager mismanaged his money and he had to go back, Leonard Cohen, and did a bunch of tours, 2 tours, I think. And anyway, I saw both of him on both those, and there was so much gratitude. And now he wasn't dying that way, but he was older and he was coming back after a time. And there was so much gratitude. And I think this was different. He was grieving, but that a sense of, I want to look in the eye of every person. There's something there about the openness of that, to actually
Right.
allow himself to give his performer self to Canada in that way, to these people, and saying, I want to connect with them. There's something too, I think, about, he's a performer, he loves this role, he was good at it, and he shared it in a way. And there's something different about that, about being on stage and loving the limelight, but actually really including yourself and looking at the people. And I think the band knew that because they said they were the people that supported him through. We supported each other and he was supported by the audience. And I just love that.
We never felt spoken down to by the hip, but you know how sometimes you outgrow music because it's like you loved it as a kid, but you heard it too much. I never outgrew the hip. I lost touch with them with some of their later albums. If I ever had people over and I didn't know what kind of music to play, I'd just choose the Tragically Hip because who hates the Tragically Hip? I'm sure someone out there does, but there was a real sense of when you talked about Gord Downie giving his persona to the whole audience, it made me think of an interview I heard with Diana Ross, who said, it's not music I'm giving when I perform, it's love. And I really feel that about this, especially that, that in this movie, that last concert, it's hard to watch because he has terminal cancer and everything, but he's still like wearing this goofy costume and he's still being less energetic, but still being that kind of wild persona on stage. And I don't know if it was the last song, but it was certainly towards the end, the song Grace 2. It's a very beautiful song. And at the end, he starts screaming, help. And it's just the look on his face is a little bit intense, but also a little, I feel like I almost saw a smirk as well. And it's both very, I remember when I saw him perform it on TV, and I was just like, my heart felt both, I felt both very full and very sad at the same time. And that help, it almost felt, was he asking for help or was he saying help, help each other?
I don't think he was asking for help. I think he was getting everything. Being up there, I think he was getting, like, is there any more healing that you can get to end your career by than being, like, how many times he would pass the microphone over, he would gesture the microphone toward the crowd and they would sing back and forth. I think he was
Yeah.
getting everything. That's a curious song. I was just reading about the lyrics today, that Grace 2, because supposedly it's based on a movie, and the beginning it's very much in the persona of someone who's like, what's the opening line?
He says, "I'm fabulously rich. Come on,
Let's
go."
go. She bit her lip. Geez,
Geez, I
I
don't
don't
know.
know. Like it's supposed to be a movie about a pair of lovers that just murder someone else, maybe a previous lover, and then hide the body and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. Like
Oh, I didn't know that.
he's there's personas all over the place. Just like Bowie, just like Tom Waits, you sing from that persona, and as well as maybe some songs are more intimate than others. Bob Cajun is another one we haven't even talked about, but that feels
Yeah.
so incredibly like I can't come out. Gord must have been driving back, listening to Willie Nelson in the car as the
Yeah,
sun's coming
that's
up. But there's still a persona in it.
Cajun, probably along with Wheat Kings, is their most popular song right now.
And an incredible song. Yeah. Yeah. And I always say this in this podcast that for me, health is bringing up a masculine energy and a feminine energy within yourself. I think that he embodied that, like the clarity with which he spoke to, just to say, after he died, his brothers and the band came to Nathan Phillips Square and they did a sing along, basically. And they talked also about their project for Indigenous peoples, and they raised money.
Right.
And I was there. It was a fall night, I think. And we were there with 500-600 people singing in Nathan Phillips Square, and it was beautiful. And I'm just thinking about the clarity of his vision and their vision, particularly around Indigenous rights and the forgetting of Indigenous history and how we need to remember it, and the projects that Gord did after that. Someone described masculinity as compassionate decisiveness. And I think of him in that way. Here, he's got this.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is this clarity. And I feel like that describes him in a lot of ways. I would add to dreamlike and odd and compassionate and decisive and mischievous at the same time. What a wonderful combination. But I love those forces of traditional masculine and feminine energy coming out. And that way I feel like he's a mentor. He's like a leader as well as
For
a good
sure.
man.
And I
Good
mean,
man.
he reframed in a lot of ways the masculine Canadian stereotype, right? The Bill Barilko story, very Canadian. Toronto Maple Leafs, hockey player, fishing trip. But it's a song about a guy who thinks about this, right?
Yeah.
Even telling the story of David Milgaard, who has to rebuild his life after being wrongly accused. So it's not like he's some sort of alternative masculine, right? Like he goes deep into masculine territory, but he pulls out so much more than most other people do, I think.
Yeah. So go and watch it, everybody. And the next movie we're going to talk about is A History of Violence by David Cronenberg. And I want to say something that I found was really compelling when we were chatting before recording this, that you said Cronenberg is your favorite director, but he hasn't directed your favorite movies. And I just thought that was really curious. So I'm curious about how you square that. And Cronenberg is another remarkable Canadian with such a strange vision. So anyway, I'm really curious to talk about History of Violence, which is one of his more. Anyway, we'll talk about it. But we'll
talk about it. Yeah. The History of Violence is probably a outlier of his movies compared to most of his other movies, Videodrome or Crash or any of that. But still, at the same time, lots to talk about around men and masculinity and
always
dealing with your past.
Keeps on giving. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.